Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Brian Sappey. I hope I'm saying your name right there, Brian. It looks kind of vaguely foreign, even though I know you're American.
Yes, Sappey.
Sappey, all right. And we're going to be talking about how he's implemented Adobe's API Manager with Swagger, ColdFusion, and APIs. And we'll look at what the API Manager is and why you should be using it, and what Swagger is and how you might use that, and how they migrated from using Layer 7 for all this stuff, and some of the big cost savings they had, and a whole bunch of automation they're doing in their ColdFusion development using this. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for giving me the time.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for staying up late to do this. I know it's after hours for you. So, and I know you're off to CF Summit in a few days. So glad you were able to fit this interview in. So tell us what is not everyone's used the API Manager in ColdFusion. Tell us what that is and why we should be using it.
Adobe, a few years ago, they started developing their own internal API Manager platform. And ideally, really what it is, it's a management tool that allows you to integrate all the elements of development and managing all the processes and APIs and be able to put it into a centralized location that allows you to really manage your REST and your SOAP APIs and grow the business and, actually have some control and data and analytics, all the things that are really important to having a successful SOA architecture plan. The idea of it, to go to this was a fairly significant one for the company that I work for. APIs have become a very popular thing amongst all developed technologies and all stacks. And it's obviously the way things have been moving for some time, and they're continually move that direction. So in order to be a real player in it and to have an enterprise type environment to be able to manage a business and then also the development side, you have to have a platform. And when we saw that Adobe had been putting quite a bit of effort into developing this platform, we thought it might be a good opportunity to take a look at helping to further not only the ColdFusion language, but also a product that Adobe was putting together, especially since the incentive was there, since we were already an enterprise customer with them for Adobe ColdFusion. The challenge, of course, was that we already had Layer 7, which is formerly Layer 7, but is now a CA product, their API Manager tool. So the process of going through all that pain and the labor pains and sweat equity of implementing that product and then even thinking about going down this road was a big decision, especially with the amount of time and money and effort and everything else that already been put in. And interestingly enough, the API Manager by Adobe is not built on ColdFusion. It's actually built on Java and Angular, but it ships with ColdFusion. So the opportunity there was a big cost savings for us. And, we already had been paying for a ColdFusion license. The opportunity to scale back and not have to have a $500,000 bill to use the CA product was quite an incentive. Wow. So that's one of the main driving forces of how we got here, and one of the things that put everything in motion. But it's been quite a journey. But the process of moving over has been met with a lot of help with Adobe and a lot of hands-on, and I have to say a tremendous amount of support from the Adobe team. So it's been very successful to date.
Wow. So you said the CA product would have cost $500,000 a year to use?
Yeah, and all implementations are different, but that's by no means a authoritative number for each client or each company that may be using it. The particular setup that we had gone with in order to facilitate our needs as far as the business goes and all the groups that were going to be consuming it, it was about a $400,000 a year bill. So the savings alone, the Adobe API Manager is of no cost with the enterprise shipped version of ColdFusion. So when we went to 2016, it was just a no-brainer. It was a piece of software that we literally had to really ante up no money for in order to try to implement. So the cost savings over the last couple of years have been tremendous for the company.
Wow. They should have given you a raise for making this happen, man.
I second that decision.
What version of ColdFusion are you guys running then?
So we're on 2016.
Yeah.
And we're planning to upgrade here when I think the new version is actually going to be released here this week. I believe that's the plan. I think Thursday is the early release, but they've had the Adobe API Manager now for some time, and the beauty of it is it actually you don't have to run it with ColdFusion, right? So it ships with it, but there is not a requirement to be running ColdFusion. So it also helps with the licensing and a number of other opportunities that you have there where you're not so restricted. But being as a premier client of Adobe's, and we've been with them for a long time, and we've been with ColdFusion for a very long time. It's been as long as I've been with the company, 18 years now, I think, ongoing. 19 years I've been using ColdFusion at Market America. It's been part of a staple of all of our development, our application development. So the opportunity to pair up with them on a venture like this was really exciting to us, and the product has proven itself time and time again since we've been in production.
And you're the applications architect there at Market America. So were you the guy who basically figured out how to solve this problem, or is it a
Yeah,
team
definitely.
thing,
The whole reason we found out, the company found out about us when I was at the ColdFusion conference 2 years ago. And they had a booth set up. The Adobe team had their table set up, and I was just walking by and started asking a couple questions about some of the product changes, some of the new product releases, the roadmap, and everything else. And that's when the Adobe team, and particularly Rock Sheath, who's been a great partner and ally in this process for us, product manager over there at Adobe for ColdFusion, he introduced us to this new software, and we went through a couple demos. And one thing, it's been a initiative of mine since I saw it. I saw there was a lot of great opportunity. They had really simplified the challenges that we have with Layer 7. They really made it easy. It's a very intuitive piece of software. It really allows business owners to get involved, not just technical folks. So they did it right. They really vetted all different types of, different platforms, Apogee, Layer 7. They looked at all these different API management tools, and they basically extracted what they thought was most important, and they really simplified what an API manager is, and which is a proxy and a way to perform some authentication and some analytics. And that's the root of what we wanted, and they nailed it. And when we saw that demo, we knew that there would probably be, some challenges, definitely some bugs. It was brand new software, but we were willing to commit to work through that. And when I brought it back to the management at Market America, they were thrilled with the product. They saw a lot of opportunity, and I think they saw the cost savings. I was given the go to begin to run with this product.
That's great. And it's great that Rakshit was able to help you with that. I had him on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he's a really knowledgeable guy. Excited about the ColdFusion 2018 roadmap. So,
yeah, he's a wonderful guy. He's been a great partner for us. Just countless amount of getting on the phone at all hours of the night, and getting his development team and really making the progress. We believe in it. He believes in it. It's really good to see Adobe taking a lot of pride in products and building out their engineering team and really making a commitment. And it makes us feel better. I mean, we're a large enterprise shop, and if we see that kind of commitment, it allows us to easier make those, these decisions to jump on board with their ventures. It helps when you have the engineering team incredibly involved and willing to make changes and willing to adapt and grow. And we want to see them get into Forrester. We want to see this product reviewed. We'd like to see it become an enterprise success amongst other organizations. And if we can help make that happen, it's a benefit for us. We saw it as a win-win, and it's just been actually a wonderful experience. And I felt like it's really brought us closer to a ColdFusion and brought us closer to the engineering team over at Adobe.
That's a great success story there. I mean, what would it take to get Forrester to cover ColdFusion with this kind of enterprise level stuff?
10 clients, from what I understand. Once they hit the 10 client mark, then it will be picked up, and Forrester will perform a white paper and case study on it. And I would love to see it get there. I think the product has a fighting chance. I think that if more ColdFusion shops were to take a look at it, I think they would see the successes that we have, and I think they would be able to run with it. And I really do believe that this tool could grow, and I believe it's more than capable of an enterprise level, and I have the stats to back it up. And the performance of the tool, everything with the whole management suite, in some ways it has completely destroyed Layer 7. Even on performance and latency, it has far exceeded the performance of that product.
Wow. Well, there's got to be at least 10 people using this. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of sites using ColdFusion. So you've got to figure out, maybe, I mean, if someone out there is using the API Manager in ColdFusion, would you like them to contact you? Or?
Absolutely. And, if there's any challenges they run into, we've been vetting this for 2 years. I would love for them to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to give them any kind of direction that I can, lead them down the path that we've gone. And definitely we've been into the pitfalls. We've made the mistakes, and no reason for someone else to suffer those same occurrences of, just the development process or migration process. But I feel like we understand the product. We know what it's capable of. We know where to push it. We know how to implement it. And we have long-term plans with it. Our roadmap is probably just as extensive as Adobe's with what we envision with this product. We've made a number of requests. I think we've had 40 different changes over the 2 years that the engineering team of Adobe has helped us with. And, I think if the ColdFusion community would just understand what they have available to them, and they actually just took a chance at looking at this, I think they would see that long-term it would simplify their lives, especially if they're trying to increase their SOA or their API architecture. And, they're really serious about getting into REST. And even if they're still using SOAP, there's a lot of advantages. And I have a couple of excellent cases of code that we have saved tremendous amount of time using even the SOAP generator, SOAP to REST generator that we're currently using in production today. I have nothing but accolades to talk about some of the ways it has not only saved us time and money, but has made developers' lives much easier. And if the Adobe community that's using ColdFusion, if they would just understand it, the tool that they have available to them, I think it would become a very popular tool in a short amount of time.
What are some of the ways this has saved you and your other developers time, Brian?
Oh, a great example would be one particular, we're an e-commerce shop and we deal with a lot of shipping vendors, and they typically are a bit slow with, updating their API architecture. In particular, they rely on a lot of SOAP, and it can be a challenge. SOAP is a very time-consuming API to build and to construct and deploy and test. It's very verbose, and I understand that it had some advantages on security back when it was really popular, but obviously REST is the much preferred type of API to build these days to make things easier. But one particular tool that the Adobe API Manager offers is a SOAP to REST WSDL generator. You're able to take a WSDL and you're able to directly put it into the interface of the API Manager, and it will generate all the REST endpoints needed in order to make those API calls. And we did it for a partner that we use for shipping, and we generated, I think it was probably about 50 REST endpoints in less than 2 seconds after dropping the WSDL in. And it was so successful that the development team saved, I would have to estimate, maybe a month to 2 months of development time of not having to build these complicated SOAP APIs with all these multiple calls and hooks. We were able to generate these REST endpoints in less than 2 seconds. And within 5 minutes, we were making test API calls through the manager over to this vendor. I think the most important thing that I want to touch on with that was that the vendor came back to us and had mentioned that they were starting to migrate over to REST endpoints, and it was still in beta version. Oh. And we tried a couple of them, and they actually didn't work. And when we had pushed back to them and let them know, they said they were still struggling with trying to figure it out. But literally, because of this API Manager tool, we were able to take a SOAP WSDL, generate REST endpoints, and be in production within weeks versus months of development. So that's just one fantastic case of one of the features that's rich. And I know Layer 7 doesn't even offer that. A lot of the API managers out in the market don't offer that. This is worth its weight in gold to me. The amount of time we saved and just the fact that it worked. It was extremely smooth, and we were out of the gate and running within weeks.
And so you use this when you're consuming other people's APIs. Do you also use it when you're creating your own APIs there? Or?
Absolutely. We have the company's been going in some different directions with APIs over the years, but one thing that we have really committed ourselves, and that's, we consume the same things that we build. So, if we're going to build an API, we're going to put it in the API Manager, and it's to be treated like an API. If we're using a third party, it goes through the API Manager. The analytics that it proves to give you, the tracking, the tracing, the debugging, the usage, the SOAs, all that can be centralized in one location. So we're not running around to 50 different log files or trying to figure out who owns what. This is all centralized, so it allows the business to manage the APIs, but also the developers to easily find what they need. It's like having a blueprint at your fingertips, and allows you to quickly get in there, figure out if something already exists, if something needs to be modified. It allows versioning. You can try the APIs directly from the tool, and it also gives you that security layer if needed. And so, anything that we build at Market America or shop.com, it goes in that API Manager, and that is how we consume it, whether it's internal or external.
So what I'm curious about the analytics you see. You can see how many API calls have been made, or how long they take, or if something's slowing up, or...
Yeah, and it's feature rich. The analytics dashboard is actually very, very interesting the way they went. They're using Kambana and Elasticsearch. So they have this beautiful interface, and it's extremely powerful. It records just about everything you could ever want to know, other than the request and response, which another feature that we've really pushed Adobe on, and they delivered. So we have the ability to turn on request and response logging on every single endpoint. But the thing that I really like about Adobe and what they've gone the extra mile, in my opinion, was they've done everything at a endpoint level, but also a resource level, where most of the tools, you can go and you can flip on logging, but this actually allows me to pick a resource or many resources inside of an API collection, and I can start to log the response and the request. And I can turn that on and turn that off as a developer. So I don't have to have a special, permissions. I don't have to go and restart anything. If I want to know how an API is performing, what's coming in, what's going out, I can see that very easily visually. But then I can also start to run analytics on how my API is performing. I can see response time. I can see the HTTP status codes being returned. I can start to filter that data. It's very intuitive, so I can extract, I can pull, I can monitor. But I really get insight into how it's performing. It's not just I'm going to push this out into production and hope it works. And I won't know anything about it until somebody complains and says there's a problem. All that's built into the manager. And I get those analytics in real time. Within 5 seconds, I can have a dashboard that's continually refreshing and just watching the payloads as they come in. So it has been extremely helpful in trying to debug. As you know, APIs can be a real challenge to debug and to dig into and get those analytics. But with the tool, it allows me to drill in effortlessly and get right in, get what I need, and really focus in on the problem. And it helps me really debug and helps me make changes quickly and get code back out to production if need be.
Tell us a bit more for people who haven't done much API development. What are some of the challenges if you weren't using this tool with debugging?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is, in the environment that I work in, for PCI reasons, we just don't have production access. We have dev access, and then even on a staging level, we have these different environments that we have to push code into. It makes it a bit of a challenge if you start to have production issues in your code with trying to really lock the problem down. So especially with APIs, when you're dealing with, no kind of a UI replay or any kind of a logging from that standpoint on trying to track down an error on a user click. This is literally data in and data out. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to track down if you can't see the data. And that's always been a challenge. And then also performance too. You want to make sure that it's performing well. There might be timeouts on the third party side or the consumer side. So because you have this tool, it really allows you to drill down to see the APIs calling in, or the APIs that are being called. You can literally see how well it's performing. You can see what kind of status code you're getting back. And that's all key in trying to debug issues. And here's a good example for you. We had another third party that we dealt with, or that we currently deal with, and they're part of our checkout process. And that third party, it was a number of API calls. So there's 5 API calls, or 5 APIs that we had to generate. And 2 of those APIs were actually webhooks. So they were responses post-processing at some point via them into us. So we actually put the webhooks in the API Manager, which has been really helpful because we had a number of problems on production, but we were able to isolate them as being a culprit or not by looking at the logs and the analytics. And we could actually see that the calls were working, and we were able to take them out of the rotation of a possible problem in checkout. So, seeing even things like this where we would have wasted time in the past with trying to nail everything down and really have kind of a trace to follow, the entire call, the entire stack, it eliminates that problem because it allows you to drill in very quickly and rule out or isolate problems as they occur rather than, trying to work on day-old or 2-day-old data. It almost allows you to have that kind of live debugging capability without interfering with code or, having to do a deployment.
Now, I noticed that there's a sandbox feature in the Adobe API Manager. Do you guys use that at all? Or?
So interesting enough, sometimes we can get very creative. We saw some potentials here for a sandbox. One of the things I will commend Adobe on is that they give you the ability to provide multiple endpoints. So if we're clustered, so we don't run into some of the challenges here, and some of the features that are baked in might not necessarily apply to us. But one of the advantages that we were able to use, because the licensing is so that we're an enterprise shop, and it doesn't require a ColdFusion license to run this, the API Manager, we were able to spin up an entire collection of boxes that literally we treat as a sandbox. And what does that mean? Well, we're in a lockdown environment. Our development environment, our staging environment are completely locked down from the outside world for security reasons. But every once in a while, we'll deal with a third party, or there's something that we don't want to necessarily push out into production that we need to expose for business needs to a third party that's been approved. Because of the fact that the Adobe API Manager has the ability to spin up an instance and actually provide different endpoints, we can create an API and in the API Manager and open it up to dev code or staging code at any point for any provider. So using OAuth, which is one of the security features back then, built into the API Manager, we're able to open up small little access to different APIs in our development or staging environment without having to open up holes in the firewall or punching holes in the firewall or open up special permissions or going through a very painful screenshot certification test for third parties. And just recently we had a contest here for the local colleges, an API contest that was a reach out to the community here to try to, build some relationships with some of the universities here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And we had a very, very, unique situation that we had some APIs that we needed to expose, but we necessarily didn't want them to go all the way to production. So we were able to create an instance of these APIs in the API Manager and allow the sandbox to point to any environment we want. So we were able to point them directly to dev and lock them down. So they literally couldn't have access to any other API. And we were able to give them a partner type relationship in the API Manager, and we were able to lock them down that way. And it was proved to be very successful. In fact, the contest ended today, I believe, and we had 0 issues with the API Manager. It was great. We could monitor the traffic, see who participated, get the analytics, and see, we kind of had insight before the contest even ended on who was doing what.
That's really cool. And, from what I'm understanding of this, you can even have a failover server. So if the API you're calling isn't working, like you're saying, it's going out to a web service, so it might not be available. It could even fail over to something to keep the thing.
That's correct. Running. We can set it up the way it's set up. We can provide multiple failover URLs, which is a really handy feature. In fact, Adobe's working on one additional change to that, so we can actually provide multiple endpoints per resource. So not only will we have the failover capability, but if we create an API in the API Manager, and then we have 4 or 5 different resources inside that API that we've created, we can actually point them to separate endpoints. So to the user in the outside world, if you're calling me right now, you're calling the API Manager, an API that I provided you that endpoint, you have no concept or any kind of clarity on what actual endpoint I'm calling under the hood. That's all obfuscated from the subscriber, the consumer, through the API Manager. So it allows us to point any API to any different technology stack that we may have running in our environment. And to the user, they have no idea. They see this really nice, clean, RESTful endpoint. And then there's a whole bunch of translations that happen under the hood on the time of the request. But it really makes the implementation very clean. And to the user on the outside world, they have literally no idea what they're calling once they go into the API Manager, other than what they've been told and the documentation that's been provided.
That is great. And then what about controlling how much they're allowed to call the API? Can they just call it millions of times, or can you control, Because when you open up an API, people could do anything, right?
Sure. Yeah. It's a hole into your system, and you're giving them access to your data. Now, that's a great question. The API Manager does come with an SOA interface. So for each endpoint, you're able to establish a service level agreement, and that includes and not limited to. I mean, you can put up. The beauty of it is that I can create all these multiple plans. So it comes with a couple out of the gate. The API Manager by default, it comes gold, silver, and try it now. But we have the capability of actually going in there and creating an actual SOA agreement. So I could create one for you today, and it's customized for you. And I might say, your access is 5,000 requests per hour, and I'm going to give you a soft failure of 10%. So if you go, 10% over, I'm going to let you do that, but then I'm going to start to cap you and say, hey, it might be time for you to upgrade your account. You need to go to the platinum, which is 20,000 requests per hour, 30,000. So we have the ability to really make sure that we lock this down so we don't get any kind of denial or there's no attack and someone's trying to maliciously take us down or anything like that. That can all be prevented very easily. And the nice thing is that it's not capped at a few plans. I can literally go into that API Manager today and create 1,000 different SOAs, and I can assign them per resource as I create them. And they have hard failures, they have soft failures. I mean, anything you can think of, percentages that you get within maxes, we can put notifications. So if I have somebody who's abusing it or constantly hitting that max, I can go ahead and reach out to them and say, hey, either you're doing something malicious here or your business is growing and I think you need to be up. So we need to talk about a new strategy for you for this year. I'll tell you one thing that I really think there's a lot of potential is at some point we may want to charge for this data. There are APIs out there that do charge, that do regulate based on an SOA. And there are some advantages here. If we can tie in an e-commerce part to this, which I think we're more than capable of, we have a plan on how to do that, then we could start to charge for plans. You might pay for a gold or platinum, but the tool would allow us to manage this and we could upgrade and we can, monitor and apply notifications on this to help us manage it. But all that exists in there and it's just as good, if not better than some of the other platforms that I've looked at. It's very easy to use. We have business owners that can set this up that might not be as technical because the GUI is so clean. We've got one owner in particular, a business owner who is not coding APIs, but he has no issue managing the tool. I mean, it's that easy. The intuitiveness is very basic. I mean, you can have an API up and create in 5 minutes and you'll be in production. It's that great.
Wow, that's great. And then I think you mentioned earlier you do some versioning on your APIs. Maybe folks who are new to this aren't familiar why you'd want to version your API.
Sure.
What is that and why would you do it?
So this is it's a particularly big challenge for us right now because we're in this migration state. So we have, this layer 7 product that we were on for many years, and we're still in the process of migrating off that. But of course, the challenge with it is you have, native apps out there that aren't easy to get through the build and review process, depending on which vendor you're dealing with. And so if we come back to them and say, hey, we've moved our APIs, we have brand new endpoints, we have brand new API keys, we have brand new OAuth credentials. All that's probably going to make them scream because, I mean, you're talking about coding changes, which cost money, loss of production time, which can cost money, the review process, which is expensive. And it's just a huge pain. So one of the challenges that we wanted to make sure that we cover when we worked with all the internal teams with the migration process was versioning. The idea of versioning is that basically if I have an endpoint today and I make a change to it, as long as the contract doesn't break between you and me, we're fine. There's really the reason for me to version the API. But the truth of it is that if I go and make that change and it breaks the contract to where your code today that's calling and working in production suddenly stops working or throws an error, we got a problem. And that's where a new version would be created. So at that point, we would make the case to version. The API Manager is well suited to do that because it allows you to go in here and create that API with a new version, a new endpoint, and you can start to test that and actually put it into a beta state or even a production state without worrying about all your consumers on the version 1. The nice thing about the API Manager when it comes to this is that there's notifications baked into it. So I can know exactly who's using the old endpoints. In the past, where there was no API Manager, honestly, it's a combination of spreadsheets, Word documents, emails, Slack messages, or whatever the case was to try to figure out who's calling what. So, in the API Manager, it's very clean on who's actually subscribed to it. You can see the security mechanisms around it and, any other, the meta details or the data details that you would need to version successfully, not break anybody. As far as the versioning goes, we've been pretty lenient on supporting the back versions. It's not always that we can be backwards compatible, but we're, pretty generous as far as continuing to support an old version. But, we try to hope to get people off the old version, especially if there's been a code improvement or enhancement as far as speed goes. And I have to say, adding to that, the other big thing that we've really been working with Adobe on was that migration plan. They know the pain as well, since they're in the same process of coming off a CA as well, the API keys, and in particular, being able to override API keys. So we actually have a feature that was baked back into the Adobe API Manager where it allows us to actually take an API key or even an OAuth key from CA's account, and actually when we build the API in the Adobe API Manager, we can actually bring and migrate those keys over with us. So it's to the point where there's literally 0 programming changes for anyone who's subscribing to the endpoints, which is a huge win for the product in the migration.
Does it help you manage your keys? Because I know when I've worked with APIs, keeping track of all those is a pain in the rear end.
Yeah, it's true. And I would usually put them somewhere and then I forget and have to go generate a new one. And it's a bit of a challenge. It absolutely does. And in fact, it's very clean. So when you have an account, so if I'm a subscriber, I would have an actual login to the system. I would be able to log in and see all my applications. So what you actually do is you create an application. You could call it shopping cart, and then you could have a search, and then you could have a product detail. All these applications you can create, and each one of those applications will always have credentials associated with it. So you could have an API key, you'd have an OAuth credentials, and that key is assigned to you and your user. So as you start to subscribe to APIs, you can actually assign your application, whatever you created, to be the subscriber default or the subscriber application to that API. So for example, if there's a bunch of shopping cart APIs that I'm going to call from a third party, I could go into my account. I can create a application called shopping cart. It would give me all the credentials that I need, and then I can use that to subscribe to these shopping cart APIs. So from a subscriber standpoint, it makes it really easy to manage and see, and you can track your own traffic. But then also from a publisher standpoint, from my side, it allows me to see exactly who subscribes, what API keys they're using, what SOA they have, and all the information they would ever need. And that way, if there's any abuse or anything like that, I can always quickly shut it down, and I know what application's causing it. And from a subscriber standpoint, it allows me to start to, segment my different APIs and my accounts very easily. It's all displayed on a really clean interface and extremely intuitive and easy to use.
So if you had to summarize why someone should be using the ColdFusion API Manager, what would you say?
I think the main reason to me is that it is almost completely necessary if you're building any kind of APIs, whether they be REST or SOAP, that you have these management tools at your disposal. There's no way to effectively manage an API, to develop the API for the process and the analytics without a tool like this. I mean, an API Manager tool is well suited for an enterprise level shop, or even a smaller shop. And that's the beauty of it. It will scale with you, but I would say it's detrimental. It is one of probably the most important things that you could have in trying to run a successful API environment, especially just for just the sheer management of it. All the things that we've talked about, from analytics to debugging, to logging, to tracing, to account creation and management, that is virtually impossible without it. And trying to manage an entire infrastructure of APIs without a tool, I would think it would just become to the point where it'd be unmanageable and frustrating, and eventually lead to a lot of performance issues, development issues, and not to mention management issues on top of that.
Cool. Now, I noticed in your talk, you mentioned a thing called Swagger. What exactly is that, and how does that relate to all this API stuff?
Right. So the tool is, again, very unique, and this is where it definitely had a leg up on CA's layers, layer 7 product, where I can take a Swagger endpoint and actually go into the API Manager, very easily hit Create REST API from Swagger, which is one button click. It will open up, and then I have a couple options. And one of the big enhancements that we actually got from Adobe was we wanted to be able to do direct input of Swagger text. We also want to be able to upload a Swagger file, and then we had the link that was already provided. So Adobe delivered insanely fast and gave us these feature sets. We feel like the product is now, there's no way you can't use Swagger to build an API in there. You have one of three options, but Swagger is, I think it's probably one of the more popular ways of constructing APIs today to get all the metadata, the documentation, and that Swagger file can be directly imported. It will create all the REST endpoints for you. It will create all the methods. It will create the name, the context, the versioning. You can even put a logo image in there. But basically, this file can be used to generate an entire collection of APIs and all the resources within a second. And it saves all the manual time and the labor. And even if you're doing anything like annotations in ColdFusion, you can utilize some of the APIs under the hood that the API Manager offers, because every feature and the UI that you see in the API Manager is also available in API format. So you can programmatically build an API in your SDLC. If you're generating Swagger docs, you can have a Swagger doc automatically or programmatically fired at the time of any of your steps in your SDLC, or even at any point you can auto-generate these APIs and reduce even more manual labor that's required. And that is a feature that I have not seen in any other API Manager to date. And it is a thing of beauty. And I know the pet store demo is always a good one, but if you have a Swagger doc today and you log in, you can have an API up and running in a matter of seconds.
Well, it sounds like you've done great work with this stuff, and you've not only have you been using it at Market America, but you've encouraged Adobe to really step up on this API Manager product?
I think it has a great chance. I think it just needs, more users from the community to embark on this mission. But I thank you. Yeah. And Adobe, I can't say enough, but the partnership will continue to grow. And I really see this product continuing to blossom and become even more vital part of Market America and shop.com.
Yeah. Now, have you used any of this stuff to do automation or with your software development lifecycle at all? Or?
Yeah, that's actually the part that we're implementing right now. We're making some changes. We're embarking more on microservices at this point. That's definitely another area that we're starting to venture into. And because of that, we're trying to automate as much as possible, automated builds and a number of other, steps that we can hopefully automate instead of having manual today. But the APIs that have been built with the API Manager, including things like the Swagger API creation, yeah, that's the plan. We're going to begin to annotate more and more of our code, and we're going to start to use those annotations and some of these builds to generate documents, and then also start to fire some of these APIs in the API Manager to help automate the process. I mean, ideally, what we're really looking for is to be able to have a developer write an API, publish that API, go through a workflow, and at that point, he needs to do nothing else, or she needs to do nothing else. It's literally just a point and click, automate, and then it'll go through our life cycle without any kind of struggles or forgetting steps. But the idea is that this tool will help us get to that point. I'm not sure we could do what we wanted to do without it. A lot of this automation was unavailable in the CA product. They had no APIs exposed. We had no way to automate or programmatically build things on the fly. And that was a big thing that we really pushed with API Manager. In fact, you could probably move all of the Adobe APIs into the API Manager and use those as your first API. So that's one of the things we had mentioned to Adobe, and I think they got a good laugh out of it. But it makes sense. I mean, we can expose some of these APIs, which we're doing for the portal. We're hooking it into a WordPress site to automate like signups and registrations from people that want to hit our hello world, learn more about our company, and get an account. This was all manual before. These are steps that somebody had to take a phone call or an email and go and create an account, email credentials. Because of the fact that we have all these APIs, we're able to expose those to any site or any platform and actually automate that process. So it requires a lot less man hours, and quite honestly, it allows us to stick to what we do better, and that's writing APIs rather than managing APIs.
Well, that's great. Well, good luck in your talk at CF Summit in a few days. Let's just change gears a bit, and let me ask you something I've been asking all the people I've been interviewing on the show, which is, why are you proud to use ColdFusion?
I've been with the product for a long time. I started with it in college and had my first job in 2006. So it's been just about coming up on 11 years, almost 12. I've dabbled in quite a few languages. I do some Java, I do some PHP, obviously all the front end technologies as well. The simplicity and the performance gains and just the commitment to the product over the last few years has really made me continue to want to explore ColdFusion. I have seen personally a big change in Adobe. There were years there that I think ColdFusion suffered. There was a transition there that I even was very nervous about. There were some years there where I was concerned about where the direction of the language was going. I don't know if it's just the new management with Adobe or a number of other things. And maybe it's, Rock Sheath might have a huge part of this, but there has seemed to be a better commitment amongst the community. The direction of the language has improved. It seems like the roadmaps have improved. I mean, they've got conferences now. There was a long time where there were 0 conferences. There just seems to be an actual commitment at this point to continue to support the language and grow it. And when you see things like the Adobe API Manager come out, they know the direction things are going. I believe the next release, from what I hear, is really focused on speed and performance and better debugging, server level tuning, things like that. This is, tags and these cool little functions. That's great, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's where the direction of the language should go. I think it's down the path that they're going. It's to try to make it more performant and to make it more of a scalable language. I know they're going to release their first Docker container here in a couple of days. They're trying to get into microservices. They've talked about a number of things. So I think that the language has a strong stance moving forward, and I think that they're playing their cards right. I think they know the direction of where they need to go. And I hear all these negative things. I read the, everybody tells ColdFusion's dead. And I know that debate goes on and on, but some of the things that really bother me is all the time where I hear about people not being able to find talent, that the ColdFusion programmers just don't exist. We have no trouble. We've got over 30 developers where I work, and I will put up any of them against any other programmer anywhere, against any language, anytime, and I think they would hold their own. I'm very proud of all of them. They're all excellent developers, and honestly, we build applications faster than any shop I know. We're an e-commerce platform that does almost $1 billion a year. We've never had an issue with the language. It performs extremely well, and it just proves the point that the language can do what you want it to do. It's all about how you use it, how you utilize it, and the people you put behind it. So this garbage about, we can't find people and they're not as good, they're not as sharp as a Java developer. I would disagree with that, and I can prove it. We do it every day, and I don't doubt for a second that there's not a ColdFusion developer that can't hold their own with a developer at any other shop doing any kind of application. So the language is here to stay, I think, and there seems to be a big commitment. And as far as marketamericanshop.com go, we're going to continue to stay on the Adobe product line, and the API Manager has a home, and we're going to continue to grow it, and we're really excited about the future.
That's great. So what would it take to make ColdFusion even more alive in the next year?
We need more people to commit to it. We need the ColdFusion community, the people that come out for this conference, they need to get on board with these kind of things. This is the direction of where it's going. APIs are really important. We need to get away from tag development. We need to get away from the simplistic approach of ColdFusion and start to use more of the modern features that are available in it, that have been available for many years, and it's either ignored or it's just a lack of education. I don't know, but I can see it in the conferences every year. I think and personally, I think the developers are getting better. I think they're understanding concepts more. They're starting to adapt more of the technology, especially around REST and the APIs. And I think there's a general change from what I see. So, but if we can continue that and grow the language, I think it will only help with companies, especially managers that have to make decisions on technology. They can start to see some of the advantages here, and that it is a viable candidate. I would like to see Adobe get more aggressive on their licensing. I think that's one area that, they could definitely help out the ColdFusion community and, start to grow it. I think that maybe it would be a more attractive opportunity for companies if they can get more competitive. And I think they realize that. And honestly, even with the microservices, we're working on that right now. They've been very open to our ideas, and I think they see a lot of potential for growth there. So if ColdFusion to me is going to make it, this is where we need to focus. We don't need to worry about tags doing cool little things and, clients that do mobile phone generation. That space is already eaten up, and I would let them have it. The focus should be on the application, making it as performant as possible, making the licensing attractive to managers or owners, and really seeing the language grow from that aspect, because I think it has a lot of potential and a lot of fighting room in that space.
That is great, Brian. Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot yourself to lead this there at Market America and also in the community you're in. So appreciate everything you do for ColdFusion.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Same to you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I like running the CF Alive podcast because I want to make ColdFusion alive and see it as a modern, successful language, which is what it really is. A lot of this is perception, I talk to lots of people who use ColdFusion all the time, so I know that's what's really going on. So anyway, you're going to be at CF Summit in a few days. What are you looking forward to at this year's conference?
Quite a bit of the API conversations. I was looking at the agenda in tonight, and I can see that it's going to be a hot topic. So hopefully I'm speaking early. I've got the 1:45 slot on Thursday, so hopefully nobody's drowned out with APIs by that point. But just looking at the topics in general, you can really tell the direction that I think most of the speakers and Adobe itself is recognizing, and the networking. It's always good to go. I mean, what better chance to talk to Adobe's engineers than there? I mean, you're getting FaceTime with the guys that are building the product. That's a rarity in this business, in my opinion. And that hands-on, one-on-one time with them has been fantastic. We have gotten bugs fixed and updates and, questions that we've had over the years or even months, or problems that we run into answered or resolved right there on the spot. So I don't think people value that as much. Maybe not. Either it's underestimated, or maybe more people should take a challenge. I mean, they've got an entire table set up with every engineer on the team there, and it's a knowledge building session. You can go up there for 10 minutes and probably solve all the problems that you had over the last year or 6 months. But there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think that's it. And that's what I'm most excited about. I mean, this conference is literally why the API Manager is what it is for us. It came out of a conference, and I would encourage everybody to go talk to Adobe and really voice your opinions. They're very open from my experience. They've never shut us down. They've been very happy to accommodate us. And I think you just got to ask. Maybe it's the fear of asking, but they seem to want to make this language better, but it starts with us too. I think the community has to realize that if Adobe is going to continue to grow ColdFusion, we have to make a commitment to making the language better. We can't just do things the old way or the same way, or take the easy way to get things done. The language is only going to be as good as the developers that are using it. If we're going to continue to grow it, then Adobe needs to see the same commitment from the development group as it does from the engineering group.
That is a great call to action for everyone here listening. So if people want to find you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, my social media is lacking a little bit, but I would think LinkedIn's probably the best route to go. That's definitely it.
We'll put the URL to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So,
excellent.
But I think you're the only person with your name in LinkedIn. So
I'm very unique. That's correct. I have yet to meet another Brian Sappey. That's for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today, Brian.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It was a complete pleasure, and I really do appreciate what you're doing for the community, and continue to keep it up. And if I can help in any way, I'd love to.